Chapter 35. During the next few weeks, until just before Christmas, Frank and Roxanne spent their nights sitting out by the pool while he told her about all the things that had happened to make them fall in love, and to make that love grow into a deep and everlasting devotion between the two of them. But Roxanne could only try to imagine what it must have been like for her when she watched him up on the stage, way back when Garrett Hollander was nothing more than a bar band touring Florida. She understood that it wasn't the musician she was initially attracted to, but surely that part of him must have been a factor in her falling in love with him. And for as much as she knew she was falling, she also knew there was something missing. Roxanne listened to Garrett Hollander's music over and over. She watched all the videos as often as she listened to the albums, and she took a keen interest in the recorded concert footage. In Frank's words, she could hear the resentment, anger, and hatred that he'd undoubtedly felt after she disappeared without a word. But most of all, she heard the pain and hurt she'd inflicted upon him. It just wasn't the same, though. Something was missing. She longed to see him perform in person. But with the way things stood now, that wasn't likely to happen. He'd made that very clear. A few days before Christmas, Roxanne was rummaging through her closet. She was curious about what kind of person the writer and actress in her was. She knew absolutely nothing about the woman she'd become, the same woman who'd stole a rock star's heart and in turn broke that same heart 1,000 times over. In the back of the closet she found a garment bag. Mainly out of curiosity, she pulled it out and draped it across the bed. Opening it, she found herself with a beautiful gown of pale pink lace and silk. "Geez," she muttered. "Where the hell did I wear this?" "It's your wedding dress," Frank said from the direction of the doorway. Roxanne gasped and turned around. He was standing there with a slight smile on his face. "You scared me." It was kind of funny now, though, after she'd felt a wave of relief. "I'm sorry." He strolled toward her. "That was not my intention." "It's okay." She laid the gown on the bed. "This is my wedding dress." He nodded and sat down next to the dress. Roxanne sat on the other side of the garment. It was the only thing between them. She pulled the gown up and held it against her. "I can't imagine wearing a beautiful dress like this." "Indeed you did." He smiled sadly and touched her cheek. "You were absolutely stunning." Roxanne looked away bashfully. "I wish I could remember." Her voice trailed off as she tried to hold back the tears. "Do you want to see it?" "Huh?" She didn't hide her confusion. "The tape," he said. "Do you want to watch the video of our wedding?" "There's a video?" she asked, hopeful. "Come on." Frank latched onto her hand and pulled her to her feet. "Let's go watch it together." Downstairs, he put the tape in the VCR and took a seat beside her on the couch. He laid his arm along the back of the couch. He used his free hand to snag the remote off the coffee table and then pressed play. Roxanne watched anxiously as Glenna descended the stairs first, then Candy escorted by Rich. She wondered why Rich was with Candy, then remembered what they'd said about Candy being blind at the time. All shots of Frank in the video weren't exactly complimentary. He'd been standing around with a sullen look on his face. It looked as if he couldn't care less about what was going on, and it seemed the quicker it was over, the happier he'd be. But that all ceased when he saw Roxanne at the top of the landing. A genuine smile crossed his face, if only for a moment, as he watched her make her way down the stairs. Yet he was wearing sunglasses. Roxanne watched as they both exchanged vows and were pronounced husband and wife. She blushed, seeing Frank wrap his arms around her and kiss her. The reception was small and informal, and the camera's eye followed Roxanne, Candy, and Glenna into the backyard. The camera didn't go out with them, just filmed them from inside. They smoked a joint. It was clear they were laughing and carrying on. But whatever the details of the conversation were, the camera was at as much of a loss as Roxanne was. The tape ended and the screen went black. She remained still for a time, trying to calm her pounding heart. Finally, she turned to Frank. Was there any time at all during that day when you were the least bit happy about us getting married? She begged for the truth. Was there even a single moment that you were happy about us being together? Deep down inside, I guess I was. He didn't want to lie or mislead her. I was determined not to let it show, though. Is that why you refused to take off your sunglasses? Pretty much, he said. But I was so consumed with my anger, I overlooked the fact that all I ever really wanted was just to have you back in my life. I have a better idea about what you were thinking on our wedding day than what was running through my own mind. Maybe it's better that you'll never know. Why's that? Well, I think it's safe to say. He had to wonder if his bid for complete disclosure would ultimately do more harm than good. You were probably wishing that our marriage was the real thing. Even though he had his reservations, he kept talking. But all the while, you knew, deep down inside, that something wasn't quite right about the whole thing. You could sense things that way. So, you married me for the sole purpose of getting me to sign the papers legalizing your parental relationship with Frankie. She paused in thought. And then you wanted to distance me from the two of you. She looked at him. Looks like you got what you wanted. Because right now, considering that I have amnesia, I couldn't be further from either of you. Well, I'll admit I do deserve that, he said. I do regret that Frankie is no longer in your memories. You know, it's really ironic, she said. I robbed you of the first 4 years of Frankie's life, and now I don't have any recollection of those years either. She laughed helplessly. I guess that kind of makes us even. I would trade my life for you to have those memories of Frankie back where they belong. Don't say that. She placed her finger against his lips to silence him. I don't want to lose you now. Frank grabbed her hand and pulled her toward him. He'd promised not to impose himself on her, but he couldn't help it anymore. He had to kiss her, and he had to do it now. I will love you forever, he said, and brushed a sweet, sensuous kiss against her lips. Christmas morning, Frankie was up early and very eager to open his presents. Frank and Roxanne had had as much fun watching him as Frankie had opening his packaged surprises. Have no fear. Frank sat down beside her on the couch. Santa didn't forget about you, he said, handing her a gift-wrapped box. For me? For you. Roxanne ripped into the present and found a bottle of Dom Perignon. She looked at Frank. What was he trying to tell her? No pressure, he said. I'm just making good on my promise. But it's entirely up to you if and when we ever use it. I have something for you, too, she said, still holding on to the bottle of champagne. Really? Frankie, Roxanne said to her son, why don't you get Daddy's present from behind the tree? Frankie struggled to drag out the huge, oblong package from its hiding place. Jesus. Frank got up to help him. What the hell is this? Halfway unwrapped, he realized it was a guitar case. He opened it with reluctance, feeling a mixture of remorse and joy when he saw the Les Paul inside. Frank snapped at his emotions and closed the lid with finality. This was a really nice gesture. He tried to play it off. But you shouldn't have done it. I don't play anymore. Yes, you do. She boldly met his eyes. In your heart, you'll always play. I don't play anymore, he said calmly, yet more forceful this time. But why? She knew Frank had destroyed his guitar, but she was back now, and she thought he'd naturally want to play again. The music came between us, Roxanne. He gave her a look that seemed to beg her to see his side. I can't let that happen again, he said more defiantly now. No more music. Later that morning, Candy, Rich, Glenn, and Glenna arrived at Roxanne and Frank's place. Roxanne had already put the turkey in the oven, and now she, Candy, and Glenna continued with the preparations for their Yuletide feast. "So how are things going with you and Frank?" Candy asked Roxanne while peeling sweet potatoes. Roxanne hesitated a second, and then pleasure crossed her face and she smiled slyly. "Okay." Candy knew she was hiding something and she'd willingly bet that it was pretty juicy. "Out with it. What's happened?"
"Well, he kissed me the other day," she said bashfully.
"What kind of kiss?"
"Passionate."
Her breath caught in her throat, shaking her voice.
"Very passionate."
"Have you guys slept together yet?" Candy dared to ask.
"No," Roxanne said sharply. "Of course not."
"Why not?" Candy looked at Roxanne like she was crazy.
"Well, I really don't want to look like a slut."
"Rocky," Candy scolded her. "Nobody's going to think you're a slut for sleeping with your husband."
"Oh, yeah."
The light bulb turned on.
"He is my husband, huh? I keep forgetting about that."
"Are you in love with him?" Candy asked as if she already knew the answer. Just as the realization formed in Roxanne's mind, she blurted it out.
"Yes."
Glenna had been quiet, listening attentively. Finally, she spoke up. "You know what I think?"
"If it's encouraging."
Roxanne laughed softly. "Girl, it's time for you to go out there and claim your man."
"Huh?"
Roxanne asked, anxious. "Oh, no." Candy shook her head. "I've seen that look before. He's your husband. He loves you. He's not going to reject you or turn you away saying, 'Oh, sorry, Roxy, but I really don't want to sleep with you.' I mean, really, please."
"He did give me a bottle of Dom Perignon," Roxanne said. "But he said it was totally up to me when or if we ever used it."
Candy knew what that meant, but Glenna didn't. So Candy decided to shed a little light. "The first time they had some cheap champagne. Whatever Frank could afford back then," she said to Glenna. "But he promised her one day they'd do it again with Dom Perignon." "Oh, how sweet." Glenna smiled at Roxanne. "He wants to recreate the first time with you again. Has he told you exactly how it happened?"
"Yes."
Roxanne's cheeks burned. "Oh, yes." Candy's voice was full of animation. "The first time they had sex was in the bathtub in the condo." Glenna replied only with sharp laughter.
"Come on," Roxanne pleaded in a whisper. "The guys'll hear you."
"I know exactly what you need to do," Glenna said with a deliberate nod. "And you should do it on New Year's Eve." Roxanne's longtime tenants had recently vacated the condo, so the next few days, Candy and Glenna schemed and plotted to recreate Frank and Roxanne's first time together. Finally, New Year's Eve came. Using the pretense of a party at Glenn and Glenna's house, they managed to separate Frank from Roxanne for the day. Glenn had asked Frank to come over and help Glenn and Rich with the preparations for the evening. At first, he tried to back out, saying he didn't want to leave Roxanne alone. But she'd quickly said that she and Candy had to meet the tenants vacating the condo to return their deposit if the conditions of the condo were acceptable. That wasn't a total lie. They were going to the condo, just not for the reason she'd given Frank. Roxanne and Candy entered the condo through the front door. All kinds of memories flooded Candy's mind, but there was nothing for Roxanne. When she went upstairs and into the master bathroom, she stared at the tub, wishing she could remember anything. Some little something. She could only try to imagine what it must have been like making love with Frank for the first time. "No memories?" Candy asked, as if she already knew the answer. Roxanne didn't say anything. She just shook her head slowly. "Don't get discouraged," Candy said. "You'll have some memories after tonight." A little later in the afternoon, Glenna sat near the telephone, watching and waiting. No one seemed to realize that she was watching for anything, much less waiting for it either. For that she was thankful. Finally, the telephone rang. Quickly, she answered the call. She listened intently for a few seconds, looking in Frank's direction. "Okay, I'll tell him," she said. "I'll see you tonight," she added for good measure. "Who was on the phone, babe?" Glenn asked. "It was Roxanne," she said. "Frank, she needs you to come over to the condo as soon as you can." "Is anything wrong?" Frank asked anxiously. Glenna gave a one-sided shrug. "She didn't sound like anything was wrong. She just said she needs you to come over there. Now." "Okay," he said, standing. "Say, listen, I'll see you guys later tonight," he said and headed for the door. "Well," Glenn said, watching Frank leave, "I guess we can find out what that's about when they come back tonight." "They're not coming back tonight," Glenna said, like it was a silly notion. "What do you mean they're not coming back?" "Oh, never mind. I'll explain it to you later." Frank headed across town, anxious over what might be happening at the condo. Maybe Roxanne had gone over there and found out the people had trashed the place before they left. He parked his car in a familiar parking space and prayed nothing was wrong. Walking up the sidewalk toward the building reminded him of such a long time ago. He unlocked the door and went inside, seeing one of her shoes lying on the floor just inside the doorway. What the hell? He closed the door, looking around. In the corner of his eye, he saw her other shoe at the bottom of the stairs. A little further up, one of her stockings was laid out strategically on the steps. Intrigue pushed Frank up the stairs. Halfway up, he found her blouse, and then saw her skirt lying at the top of the stairs. The possibilities lured him up. Inside the empty bedroom, he found her pink silk panties lying on the floor. Suspecting that she might be in the bathroom, he thought about what that could mean. Then he saw her bra hanging on the bathroom doorknob. A year ago, anger would have consumed him as he entered the room, the place where it had all ended. But now those bad memories were trivial, insignificant. The only thing he could think of right now was that Roxanne was in the bathroom, and he was 100% certain that she was naked and in the bathtub. "Roxy?" He opened the door slightly. "You found me." She laughed softly as he came into the room. "Come on in," she said. "The water's great." Roxanne was lounging in the bubbled water. The Dom Perignon was chilling in a bucket of ice sitting next to the tub. 2 champagne glasses sitting on the rim of the bathtub didn't escape Frank's notice. "I've been doing a little research," she said, "but I keep hitting a snag." "Anything I can do to help?" He sat down on the edge of the tub. "Why don't you bring yourself in here with me? And let's reminisce." "Well," he teased, "I don't know." Roxanne gave him a little tug, and he came crashing down into the water. "I seriously doubt it was this hard to get you in here the first time." Frank laughed, wiped the bubbles off his face, and dabbed them onto hers. "Let's have a toast," she said. "I'll pour the champagne while you get undressed." After he'd tossed his wet clothes aside, she handed him a glass of champagne. "What should we drink to?" he asked. "Let's drink to... Oh, I know. Let's drink to us." Frank downed the champagne and set the glass on the edge of the tub. "Come over here, woman." Laughing, he pulled her to him. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her sweetly. "Make love to me, Frankie." Her whispering trailed off. "You don't know how long I've waited to hear you say that." He kissed her again. Even though she didn't remember it, Roxanne straddled his lap just as she had done so many years ago. The waves rocked with them, gently at first, then quickly intensified as they hung on to each other for dear life. Their passions exploded concurrently with satisfaction. Roxanne lay lifelessly against Frank's chest. His arms were wrapped loosely around her waist. "I love you," she whispered. As far as she knew, that was the first time she'd ever said those words to him. "Yes," he exclaimed triumphantly. "I love you too." How lucky could one man get? The love of his life had fallen for him not once, but twice. Chapter 36. In January, Roxanne decided she was going to have to resort to drastic measures if she was ever going to see Frank in a live performance. She knew she loved Frank. She'd admitted as much. She also knew something was missing. She had to get Frank back up on that stage again. She knew he'd never be truly happy without his music, and surely the musician in him had been a part of the man she'd fallen in love with the first go-around. In a way, she felt cheated because she didn't know that part of him. She felt strongly about it, but getting him on stage wasn't going to be easy. Realistically, putting him on the spot was the only way to do it. That notion would take careful consideration and planning. The Grammys were coming up in February, and Roxanne decided to use the event to her advantage, since Garrett Hollander's last and apparently final album had been nominated for several awards, including Album of the Year. If she could find a way to present the award herself, she could put him on the spot whether he won or not. But it was going to take some detailed planning to pull it off. But Roxanne was unwavering. Where there was a will, there was a way. And she definitely had the will. So there must be a way. Initially, she'd employed the help of her agent, Walt. "But Roxanne," he'd objected, "the Grammys are usually presented by people in the music business."
"I know that," she said. "But there are exceptions to every rule. So fix it. Get me that spot. I don't care what it takes, just do it."
"I'll do what I can."
"Do more than that."
Next, she called on Garrett Hollander's ex-manager. Even though she'd never met Bruce Carter, she counted on the fact that he would see her once he found out who she was. She was right. His secretary had explained that Frank Garrett's wife was there, and he quickly appeared in the outer office to greet her. "Miss Simon." They shook hands. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. How's Frank?"
"He's fine. In fact, he's why I'm here."
"Let's just step into my office," he suggested and led her inside.
"I think it's time to reassemble the band," she said. "Unfortunately, Frank refuses to accept that."
"What can I do?"
"I've got a plan."
She sat down in one of the 2 empty chairs in front of Bruce's desk.
"If I put him on the spot, then he'll have no other choice but to do the show."
"And just how are you going to do that?" Bruce hurried around his desk and dropped into his chair.
"I've got my agent working on getting me a spot as a presenter at the Grammys. If I can get your help, that's where I can announce the reunion concert for Garrett Hollander."
"I missed something," he said, shaking his head. "I thought you said Frank wasn't on board."
"He's not. That's why I need you to book the Bayfront Center in St. Pete for some time in late March."
She looked at him to make sure he stayed on the same page with her. His confused expression said he wasn't.
"If I announce the concert, I know Frank. He'll play it."
"Do you understand the price involved to book the Bayfront Center?"
"I'm willing to foot the bill," she said. "I know my plan will work."
"Well, if you're willing to take that chance, then who am I to deny you?" He was on board. Good.
"By the way," she said, "the band you're booking this for is a secret."
"A mystery guest. I like it." He paused as if deep in thought. "What about the band itself? A couple of them are in Europe playing with other bands."
"You just book the hall and leave the band to me."
She stood, offering her hand as if the meeting were over. "I'll be in touch." He was about to push himself up, but she waved him off. He stayed put. She moved leisurely toward the door, and before opening it, she glanced over her shoulder.
"And remember, not a word to Frank."
Next on Roxanne's list was a visit to Rich. If anybody could get the other guys back, it was him. The door opened, and Rich took one look at Roxanne and instantly knew she was up to something. "You look like a girl on a mission."
"You know me pretty well, huh?"
She laughed softly. "Better than most. What's up?"
I want you to get the band back here to perform a concert sometime in March. I'm not sure of the exact date yet, but I'm working on it.
Rich's mouth dropped open and his brow crinkled. Clearly, he thought she was nuts.
Garrett Hollander will perform a reunion concert in March.
Her tone had a finality to it. Does Frank know about this? He asked.
You just leave Frank to me.
He'll never do it. Rich shook his head. Not in a million years.
Would you care to make a wager on that?
How exactly are you going to manage this? Now he was curious, more so than skeptical.
I have a plan.
His head bobbed into a slow, knowing nod. That you're not going to share?
The less you know right now, the better.
She stuck a warning finger in his face.
But you can't say anything to Frank until I tell him first. And that won't be for a while.
How will I know you've told him?
Oh, you'll know.
It's never going to work, he said, shaking his head again. He won't do it.
Oh, he'll do it all right.
Roxanne. Walt's voice poured over the line. It wasn't easy, but I got you the spot. You and Candy will be presenting the Album of the Year award.
That's perfect,
Roxanne said as a smile tipped the corners of her mouth. Things really fell into place when she heard from Bruce Carter in late February with the news that the Bay Front Center was booked for a mystery guest on March 28th. That gave her a month to get the band ready once she'd made the announcement. As time drew near for the presentation of the Grammys, Frank had to wonder how Roxanne and Candy had been chosen as presenters, for Album of the Year no less. He didn't press her about it. Instead, he let it eat at him until they arrived in L.A. for the awards show. In their hotel room, Frank watched Roxanne dress for the show, still trying to figure out why and how she'd been selected as a presenter. He also knew Kirk Bronson was his competition. Once again. Maybe she knew something he didn't. Did she already know that Bronson had won the award and she wanted to present it to him? He blew off that scenario quickly, chalking it up to his overactive imagination. Maybe, just maybe, he'd underestimated his worth as a rock star. Maybe they wanted the wives of the winners to present the award to them. Yeah, that was it. The Grammys were nearly over. There was but one award left to be presented. Album of the Year. Garrett Hollander had received 3 nods so far, and now Frank watched aimlessly as Roxanne and Candy approached the podium.
And the winner is...
Roxanne's words trailed off while Candy tore into the envelope. Candy's expression gave the results away before she ever said a word. Garrett Hollander 4, she nearly squealed. By Garrett Hollander. Frank and Rich shook hands with those around them and then made their way up to the stage. As Frank ascended the steps, it hit him. He'd won instead of Kirk. Frank and Rich embraced and kissed their respective wives, and then Rich took his turn with the thank yous first. Afterward, Frank gave a brief speech about what winning the award meant to him. When he was done, he reached for Roxanne's hand. She tangled her fingers with his, but instead of exiting the stage, she stepped back toward the podium.
"Excuse me," she said into the microphone. "There is one more thing I'd like to say. March 28th of this year, Garrett Hollander will perform in concert at the Bay Front Center in St. Petersburg, Florida, for one appearance only."
Having said what she had to say, Roxanne headed off stage with her stunned husband at her side. He held his tongue backstage, in the limo, and even in the hotel lobby as they stepped into the elevator. It was filled with people, so Roxanne knew the odds that he'd speak up in there were doubtful. Nope. He still hadn't said a word by the time he'd closed the door of their suite. He stood there scrutinizing her for what seemed like forever. But finally he opened his mouth to speak, and started yelling. "What the hell is wrong with you? Didn't I make it clear to you on Christmas morning? It's over." He crossed his arms defiantly over his chest. "I'm not playing that show."
"I'll make a deal with you."
She sat down on the foot of the bed, while Frank continued to tower above her.
"You play this show, and then, If you can tell me you still don't want to play, I won't ask you to do it again.
No.
Why? Give me one good reason why not.
If I told you once, I've told you 1,000 times.
Furiously, he sat down beside her on the bed.
I can't run the risk of hurting you again.
Frankie, I just know that if you'd get back up there on that stage, she pleaded with him, then you'd see it's not really over.
I'm not doing it.
Make no mistake. If you don't agree to do this one show, you'll leave me no other choice. As soon as we return to Florida, I'll file for a divorce.
Frank shook his head, stalling.
And while you're trying to figure out how to get out of this, she got up and moved to the dresser. You can ponder on this for a little while. She turned around to face him, leaning against the dresser. Mr. I'll do the right thing, she mocked him. I'm due in September.
You're due in September? He didn't hide his confusion. What does that mean?
Well, I'm kind of hoping for a girl this time.
A girl? And the clouds began to clear. You're pregnant? He was on his feet and had her in his arms before she could move. I take it you're happy about this news? She asked, enjoying the feel of him. Happy? He laughed. Baby, I couldn't be more thrilled.
Then you see why you have to do the show.
Are you okay? He asked anxiously, ignoring her bid for control. Are you sure it was all right to make this trip? Frank, she laughed ridiculously. I said I was due in September, not next week. The next day, ticket outlets all over the country received tens of thousands of requests for Garrett Hollander's show. In the end, there were more requests than tickets to go around. And as the concert's producer and promoter, Roxanne would reap the rewards. Once again, Roxanne Simon had struck gold. Reluctantly, Frank went into rehearsal with the rest of the band. He didn't want to do it, but he felt he had no choice. His wife was threatening to divorce him if he didn't do the show. But still, he couldn't help feeling that this was only going to lead to disaster. Oddly enough, though, the closer he got to the day of the concert, the more Frank realized how much he missed playing. But it was a notion he intended to fight off and conquer. Finally, the day came. The day of the show. Roxanne, he yelled up the stairs. The limo's here, let's go. On the drive to St. Pete, Roxanne watched Frank become more and more preoccupied. She ran her fingers through his hair. You okay? I just want to get this damned concert out of the way, he said with a shrug. Then we can get on with our lives. You, me, Frankie, and the new baby. He let her know where his priorities lay.
Frankie, I want to say something.
Go ahead.
I've learned enough about the past to know... She paused, searching for the right words. I've decided... I think that... Before, I had this idea that music was more important to you than me. But I know better than that now. And I just want to say, I'm not threatened by your music anymore.
You know you mean more to me than anything in this world. He caressed her cheek. Including music.
I know, she smiled. I think I was jealous of the music before. But I'm not anymore. I just want you to be happy.
I'll be happy as long as I have you and our children.
Children. He liked the sound of that.
Music could never take your place. It was only a means of expressing my feelings.
You have to do this show, she said.
And I hope you won't hate me for forcing you. Don't you know by now? He laughed softly. I could never hate you. After the concert, Frank and Roxanne returned home. She was still riveted with the excitement of seeing him on stage for the first time, that she could recall anyway. She twirled around the room.
Oh my God, that was so cool.
A one-sided smile curled on Frank's lips. You liked that, did you?
Did I like it? She stopped in front of him. Oh, Frankie.
She clutched his hands in hers.
Watching you up there on that stage, that was such a turn-on.
Really? He said with a measure of intrigue. She tiptoed up and kissed him eagerly.
Okay,
she said breathlessly. Wait. He backed her up to look into her eyes. Are you sure it's okay? It won't hurt the baby?
It won't hurt the baby.
Hours later, Roxanne lay comfortably on Frank's chest, covers scarcely draped over their bare bodies. He was still wound up from the concert. Thoughts of the event rambled through his head as he gently caressed her hair.
So, how do you feel about playing now?
She asked. I guess I did miss it, he admitted, still stroking her hair.
Will you do it again?
She looked at him. How would you feel if I went back into the studio?
If it makes you happy, she said, I wouldn't mind it.
And what will make you happy?
My memories, she said with a little shrug.
She wasn't bitter about it, though. She'd accepted it. What she'd lost wasn't coming back, but she was making new memories, and she was okay with that. I'm sorry I can't give them back to you.
It's okay. Sometimes I just wish I could remember things like Frankie's birth or our wedding.
Well, Frankie's birth is something neither of us have. Nobody could do anything about that. But I can give you our wedding again.
The videotape is not the same thing as living through it.
She thought she knew what was on his mind. Very true, he smiled. That's why you and I are going to get married again.
Huh?
You will marry me again, won't you?
Are you serious?
She asked.
You do it again? For me?
Of course. I'd do anything for you. Don't you know that by now? Chapter 37. 3 weeks later. The sounds of laughter filled Roxanne's bedroom as she, Candy, and Glenna prepared for the renewal of Roxanne and Frank's wedding vows. They'd dressed in the same gowns they'd worn the first time, but the bittersweet situation had no effect on any of them now. The day was a truly happy one for everybody, especially Roxanne. Okay, Candy said. Something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. She paused for effect. For something new, she handed Roxanne a small box. Roxanne took it and opened it. Inside was a 6pence for her shoe. And for something borrowed, Glenna, not one to be outdone, handed her a small jewelry box. I wore these when Glenn and I got married. I would be honored if you'd wear them today. Roxanne opened the tiny case to find a pair of diamond droplet earrings.
Oh my God, Glenna. These must be very special to you.
They are. And so are you.
I will take very good care of them. I promise.
Now, Glenna bit back her tears. For something old, I guess your wedding dress could be considered that.
That's true, Roxanne said. But I have something else in mind for something old.
She opened the middle drawer of her vanity and carefully pulled out a large jewelry box.
I hope you don't end up hating me for this, she said to Candy.
Why would I hate you? Candy asked, as if it were a ridiculous notion.
Because I didn't wear these the day that I married Chuck.
Carefully, she opened the case. A beautiful strand of white pearls rested against black velvet.
These were given to my grandmother the day she got married. She gave them to her daughter, my mother, the day she got married.
Candy gave Roxanne a comforting pat on the shoulder. They weren't meant to be worn before today. She sucked in a breath. Now all that's left is something blue. And we have that covered, Glenna announced proudly, pulling out yet another box that contained a blue garter. After the ceremony, Frank swept Roxanne away to the airport, where they were destined to fly off into the sunset on a private jet. She glanced out the window and then back to him.
"Where are we going?"
"Somewhere that no one can find us," he said. Back at Frank and Roxanne's house, Rich had just informed Candy that they too were going on their belated honeymoon. "But I told Roxanne I'd take care of Frankie while she was gone," Candy argued with him. "Roxanne and Frank are both aware that you and I will be out of town too," he said. "They know Frankie will be with Glenna and Glenn."
"Really?"
Excitement invaded her tone.
"We're actually going?"
"Yes."
"Where?"
"I was thinking someplace tropical. A place that doesn't require a whole lot of clothes." Roxanne and Frank ended up at an elite resort on an obscure little island in the Caribbean. Clearly, Frank had gone to great lengths to ensure their privacy. A heartwarming gesture, she thought, since she was aware that the press had shown up on their first honeymoon. After a couple of days on the island, the couple emerged from their private cottage in the late afternoon. The bride had expressed an interest in watching the sunset, and the groom was happy to oblige. With a blanket tucked under one arm and the other arm draped around Roxanne, Frank led her to the sandy beach. He spread the blanket out, and they lay down together. She turned on her side and faced him, propping her chin in her hand.
"Am I the same?"
"The same as what?" he asked carefully, uncertain of what she was fishing for.
"As before?" He thought about it.
"Mostly, yes."
"Mostly,"
she said slowly.
"What's different?"
"It's hard to explain," he said warily. "It's like you have a confidence now that you didn't have before."
"Maybe I do," she decided. "I'm only guessing here, but I think you're probably different too."
"And you base your opinion on what?" he wondered playfully.
"I could never have left the man here in front of me now. Not in a million years."
"I'll never give you a reason to want to leave me again," he said.
"I've been thinking. I want to turn the book you, Candy, and Rich wrote into a screenplay while I'm pregnant."
"A screenplay, huh?" He paused, pondering the idea. "Who's gonna play you in the movie?"
"Well, me, of course,"
she giggled.
"And who's going to play you?"
"Well, me, of course," he laughed.
"Would you really do a movie with me?"
she asked, hopeful. "Well, if you're playing you, then nobody's playing me except me."
"I'm going to hold you to that, you know."
She traced her fingertips along his jawline and then kissed him. Frank wrapped her in his embrace and cupped her face in his hands. He surveyed the beach, wondering if they could get away with making love at the water's edge. But he saw a couple off in the distance walking toward them. "Looks like somebody's got the same idea as us," he said, with a little nod toward the couple. "Well, at least I know it's not going to turn out to be your sister this time." He chuckled, thinking of a time that Candy had walked in on them in the bathroom at the condo. Down the beach, the couple strolled along arm in arm. Frank and Rich had never discussed the particulars of where they planned to take their respective wives on their respective honeymoons. As Rich and Candy walked along, it became increasingly evident that someone was on the beach up ahead of them. "Look!" Rich pointed toward the beachgoers. "It seems that someone else has the same idea." "My luck," Candy snorted a laugh. "It's Frank and Roxanne." This has been Crazy for You, a controversial romance. Written by Sandra Edwards. Narrated by Laura Ramaday. Copyright 2010 by Sandra Edwards. Production copyright 2013 by Sandra Edwards.